how narcissists are made. A few caveats before we begin. Number one, no one really knows for sure how narcissistic pathology is created per se. We have things that we see in many or even most of these situations, but we cannot point to those things or anything conclusively and say, we know 1,000% for sure that this and only this is how this happens. We have strong correlative factors and we have logical theories, but how the mind actually works is in many ways still just as big of a mystery to humans as it has always been and maybe always will be. Number two, no one really knows why the same set of circumstances results in one outcome for this person and a different outcome for that one, but this does happen a lot. It could be genetic, it could have to do with someone's natural temperament, it could be a lot of things. The simplest way to understand it at this time is probably to say that everybody's different and what impacts one person one way does not always impact others in the same way. Some people might be devastated by something, but if the same thing happened to someone else, they are not anywhere near as affected. We don't really know why this is so. Again, we have theories. Those will remain so until something either proves them true or proves them false. When we look at narcissistic pathology as a thing, it is defensive in nature. This is a person constantly on the lookout for threats and attacks. They seek power and control because these things seem to be viewed as necessary to combat a core vulnerability. In other words, pathologically narcissistic adults feel vulnerable. They feel weak and powerless, so they seek power and control as a way to address those feelings. Those feelings cause distress. They're uncomfortable. That's a defensive strategy. I fear that you're going to take advantage of my weaknesses and my vulnerabilities, so I need to make sure that you can't do that by being in the one-up position where I am more powerful than you somehow. And the you in that sentence is literally everybody in some way or another. Narcissists have a pretty hardened, dark outlook in general, coupled with and likely created by a fear-based orientation to the world. And they seem to feel like a target due to their vulnerabilities and due to their belief that everyone is operating in this same way. They're only out for themselves. They're looking for any way they can to get over on everybody else. So narcissists need to be sure that they secure the power position for themselves. That way they can make sure they're not the ones being taken advantage of by anybody. This is accomplished by different things, seemingly dependent on the narcissist's natural inclinations and temperament, as well as what they have found works for them. Narcissists who are naturally more aggressive and assertive may be violent or bully types of people because this would be what is more natural for them. Narcissists who are naturally less aggressive and less assertive might be manipulative victim or martyr types because that would suit their natural temperament better. Some might be a little bit of both or even neither, depending on the situation or their role in it. This is, for example, the difference between what we call overt and covert, or vulnerable and grandiose. These are more labels or categories for expression of behavior than anything else because the motivation behind them is the same regardless. The reality is that all narcissists can be and often are both, but generally they're more one than the other based on their natural temperament and things like that. People sometimes find covert narcissists more frightening or more dangerous, for instance, but this is largely due to how difficult they are to identify and to recognize. Covert means hidden. This is the same for all of the various quote-unquote types of narcissists, by the way. Most of these things are just categorizations of behavior. The people these categorizations apply to are not really different from each other. They're just doing different things or exploiting different situations. A guy who robs a bank and a guy who holds up a store are not really that different from each other, and neither of them are all that different from a guy who punches somebody on the street and steals their wallet. A thief is a thief is a thief. They've all got the same motive and the same mindsets. A covert narcissist and an overt narcissist, or a vulnerable narcissist and a grandiose narcissist, all these people have the same goal: achieve power and control in order to address their core vulnerabilities. But what are these core vulnerabilities? Where do they come from? What drives narcissistic personalities to seek power and control over other people the way that they do so constantly? Is it power for its own sake? What's the reason? The answer, which might surprise some people but will also make perfect sense to other people, appears to be fear. Narcissistic personalities are very fearful people. They aren't constantly scanning the environment for threats because they think that's fun. They're afraid. They feel exposed. They feel vulnerable. They don't feel safe. And they hate that. They hate being afraid. They hate being what they perceive as weak. They hate other people for making them weak and for making them afraid as they see it. Narcissists appear to view the world as being full of finite resources that everyone is competing for all at the same time, at all times, in as cutthroat a manner as possible. There's only ever enough for one in any given situation. They have to make sure that one is them. Otherwise, they fear they'll get nothing. If you've dealt with someone who's pathologically narcissistic, you've very likely seen this mindset firsthand. They're the only person who matters. And not only are they the only person who matters to them, they expect to be the only person who matters at all. They fully expect that everyone will simply move out of the way for them, that their needs will automatically be considered and attended to before anything else. They take for granted that they will automatically be given more than everybody else, from food to money to love to everything. And if this does not automatically happen, they are grievously wounded and extremely angry. How dare you? How dare you insinuate that they don't matter at all? How dare you attempt to only give them crumbs? How dare you be so selfish? And you are standing there totally shocked and confused, like, okay, I was just saying that I'm my own person and I have my own needs and my own motives and also that I matter too. I wasn't saying that you don't matter. But for narcissists, there is no two. There's only enough for one. And if they're not that one, then they don't matter at all. You're trying to take everything for yourself and give them nothing. That will not be tolerated. It is a very simple equation. If you or anybody else matters, they don't. That's it. There's also the fact that they genuinely do not appear to understand that other people actually do matter. They're just not built to be able to see that. Empathy and being able to see past yourself are functions of maturity. Narcissists are not emotionally mature. These words, by the way, are really nowhere near impactful enough to describe the state of these personalities in all honesty, but nevertheless, it's the truth. They're not emotionally mature. The entitlement, for example, that you see in the situation that we just described is the infantile entitlement we see in babies who are not able to understand that the mother is a separate person with separate needs and motives and a life that does not involve the baby. The mother exists only as a caregiver for the baby as far as the baby can understand, and the baby's needs are the only ones that exist. That is natural and necessary in a relationship between a caregiver and an infant. It is disastrous in any relationship between adults. If babies are not tended to, if they're not taken care of, they'll die, plain and simple. That's why they cry and why they become distressed. It's a built-in instinct that also works to alert the caregiver that the child needs something. The baby can't tell the caregiver what it is, of course. All they can do is cry. The caregiver then has to try to anticipate or even guess what the problem is and address it. Anyone who has taken care of a baby knows the hysteria that can be provoked in a baby by not getting their needs addressed. This is because not getting their needs met results in death. And since they can't get their needs met themselves, they have the instinct to cry in order to make sure that these things are taken care of. With very few differences, this appears to be exactly the way that adult narcissists operate. They don't seem to be able to address their own needs, so they need to induce other people to do it for them. They are dependent in this way. If they cannot induce others to do it for them, there's often a big reaction, and it always comes down to that same infantile entitlement. This is why they so often insist that you should have anticipated their needs or been able to read their minds and know what they needed or what they wanted or what was wrong or whatever, and address that and fix that and done that for them. That's your job as far as they see it. That's what's normal and right and fair. They don't have to do that for you, of course, but you do have to do it for them. That's your job. That's what's expected out of this relationship. Again, there's that infantile entitlement. This is a ridiculous requirement between two adult human beings. It's not your job to read another adult's mind or address their needs. They need to do that for themselves as adults, and if they can't, it's still not your responsibility. It is what it is. To take that kind of responsibility for others onto yourself can create codependent relationships, where one person is the adult caretaker and the other is an emotional child. These relationships are usually unbalanced and generally toxic. These dynamics are also dangerous when dealing with narcissists in particular because they feed into not just this person's refusal to take responsibility for themselves, their own feelings, and their own behavior, but it also perpetuates their feeling of powerlessness. They feel controlled by the other person and at that person's mercy due to their dependence on that person. At any moment, the person can decide that they don't want to take care of the narcissist anymore, or they could decide to leave and abandon them or take advantage of them somehow. The narcissist's dependence on their quote-unquote caretaker makes them feel vulnerable and controlled. So they endeavor to control the caretaker, because if you control the person who you believe has all the power, then you have all the power. Not that this is understood by narcissists on any such deeper level, of course. The majority of the time, it appears to be predicated on feelings more than anything rational. I feel controlled, therefore I am controlled, and I need to control the person who is controlling me. I feel powerless, therefore I am powerless, and I need to take power over the person who is exercising power over me. That's what it's all about. This is, for example, why many narcissists will accuse you of being controlling, because you will not allow them to control you. This dynamic can result in an exhausting, horrific push-pull where the narcissist requires you to take responsibility for them while at the same time hating and resenting you for quote-unquote being so controlling. Where they attack you for allowing them to be dependent on you and then attack you for not allowing them to be dependent on you. Over and over and over again, world without end, amen, right? You're everything, you're nothing, you're everything, you're nothing, over and over and over. This appears to happen because, for whatever reason, adult narcissists seem to have been unable to individuate from their caregivers as babies. That process was never completed, and because of that, they are both completely dependent and reliant upon external validation and enormously resentful of their dependence on that. They need it, but they hate that they need it, and they hate you for giving it to them, even though they will also hate you for not giving it to them. They hate themselves for needing it. They hate you for allowing it. They want to be independent, but they can't. The push-pull dynamic in these relationships appears to originate within the narcissists themselves, where on one hand, they want to be independent and free of dependence on other people, but on the other hand, the idea of independence fills them with terror that their needs will not be met, like the baby crying, and because they're aware on some level that this type of independence is very likely not possible for them. Narcissists might blame the people around them for this, accusing them of quote-unquote making the narcissist dependent on them because they're so controlling. The process of individuation begins to happen in humans at around 8 months old, when they are still legitimately a baby. This is when people start to have the first awakenings to the idea that baby is baby and mommy is mommy, and those are two separate people. Mommy is outside of baby, baby exists outside of mommy. Baby has baby's own self, and this is a separate self from mommy. These things are the beginnings of self, of the formation of identity and self-concept and stuff like that. Before this, and for years after, baby depends on mommy to help build a self-concept. Mommy is a mirror who reflects to baby if baby is bad or good or important or not important, whatever else. This is accomplished mostly through how mommy interacts with baby. If the mommy treats the baby as if the baby is good and important, the baby receives the message that they're good and important. If not, then not. This is what helps form the very beginnings of the baby's self-concept and their identity. If you understand anything about how narcissistic supply works for adult narcissists, then you know it works exactly this same way. Narcissists use other people as mirrors to tell them who they are for a self-image, a self-concept, a self-reflection, the same way a very young baby does. For whatever reason, narcissists have not evolved beyond this infantile way of functioning. They don't have a stable self-concept or a stable identity. They are dependent upon external validation and input to see themselves, just like a baby is. Because they don't have a developed self-concept or identity, they couldn't complete individuation from their caregivers. How would it have been possible? To individuate is to be an individual. And if there's nothing there to grab onto, to be, in other words, then the process can't be completed, as we see in adult narcissists, because it was not. But why didn't they develop an identity and a self-concept, which is arguably the core issue in the narcissistic personality? What prevented that? We don't know the answer to this question conclusively, but a correlative factor we see in many situations is that many narcissists were themselves raised by narcissistic caregivers. The abuse done by narcissistic caregivers is perhaps devastating beyond description in many ways, and maybe the worst result of this is that it so often creates more narcissists. Narcissists are generally disastrous as parents. They are too immature themselves to be able to care for other people in any real capacity, much less a being so fragile and easily damaged as a human baby. Even when narcissistic parents appear to enjoy their children, there's very often still a lack of connection, lack of empathy, and a very deep, permeating selfishness that affects the child in very serious ways. Their feelings for the child are still just superficial and only extend as far as how the child relates to the narcissist. That's the only way narcissists can really interact with anybody. In keeping with this, narcissists tend to treat their children the same way they treat everybody else. That is to say, they do not allow their children to be their own people. The child is told who they are, what they're thinking, how they feel, what they meant, what their motives are. This is what you meant when you said that. This is what you did when you did that. This was your they are relentlessly gaslit, lied to, tricked, manipulated, set up, neglected, mistreated, invalidated, and constantly forced into a reality that does not match their actuality, their lived experience of events. This is horrifically damaging when it happens to an adult. Adults often feel like they're going crazy, like reality makes no sense, like they're losing themselves and they don't know who they are. The damage this can cause a developing child when it is done to them by a parent who they automatically believe is catastrophic. Perhaps most catastrophic of all, due to constantly being gaslit and told who they are and what they're thinking and how they feel, and being forced to ignore their own instincts and second guess every single thing they think and feel, the child never has a chance to create their own self-concept, their own identity. This is compounded by the fact that narcissistic parents tend to perceive any separate identity in their child as a threat to them. People around narcissists are not allowed to have their own thoughts, not allowed to have their own feelings, opinions, motives, needs, wants, or anything else if these things do not exactly reflect and cater to the narcissist. It is perceived as rejection and an abandonment of the narcissist to do otherwise. This separateness, this individuality in others is relentlessly attacked because it's viewed as a threat. This includes their children. The child's identity, whatever it could have been, is essentially smashed out by the narcissistic parent and replaced with a mirror of their own. You can see the depth of the problem here then, because beyond all of the egregiousness of this on its surface, there's an even bigger issue underneath, since the narcissistic parent does not have an actual identity either. They have stomped out the child's identity and replaced it with the shadow of a reflection of a ghost. The child has nothing real, nothing stable that they can grab onto in order to ground themselves or combat this infiltration. There's no safety, no stabilizing force. There's no self. There's nothing there. The child is left with nothing, just an empty field in the aftermath of a complete annihilation. This is often made worse by the fact that many narcissistic parents also teach their children nothing in the way of how to deal with things or cope with the world or even basic life skills. People raised by narcissists must often learn these things on their own. And in the case of the people who themselves become narcissists, the only real, quote, skill that they seem to have learned is how to be dependent on other people to do all these things for them. Many narcissistic parents instill this dependency in their children somewhat intentionally, in the sense that they want the child to remain dependent because, again, they perceive separateness and independence away from them as abandonment, as rejection. Spoiling often falls under the category of this created type of dependence. And to be clear, we're not talking about some lofty or different definition we're talking about actual spoiling of a child. Giving them whatever they want, no matter what, never telling them no, never letting them fail, never giving them consequence or imposing limits of any kind, never letting them face any natural limits or consequences, never correcting them, never disciplining them, never teaching them how to share or to consider other people, never teaching them self-control or responsibility. That is spoiling. There are many people who believe that spoiling is separate from abuse or neglect. It's not. Spoiling and overindulging children harms them, sometimes irreparably. Not only are spoiling and overindulgence a form of neglect, but it creates adults who do not understand that you can't always have what you want, who don't understand that other people actually matter, who have no frustration tolerance, no ability to tolerate negative feelings, no ability to take a loss gracefully, no ability to handle being told no, no ability to fail. The world is not kind to people like that. It's really not. Spoiling sets children up for failure as adults. It cripples them. Narcissistic parents often engage in spoiling as part of image maintenance. In other words, they're doing it because of how they think it makes them look. If they give their child whatever the child wants, or if they do everything for the child so that the child never has to lift a finger, this somehow proves that they're a good parent and therefore a good person. How this might actually impact the child does not occur to them or matter. They might also be doing it because of how they feel something is reflecting on them in another way. For example, a narcissistic mother or father might defend their child and never let them face consequences outside of the home because they view the child as an extension of themselves and their parenting, therefore the child can do no wrong. Again, how this might impact the child is not considered. It's all about the narcissist. So here we have a child with no stability, no identity, no real self-concept, who is either being scapegoated or treated as the golden child. Either of the children in either of these roles can become a narcissist, by the way. It is a myth that only golden children become narcissists. Both children's identities are being systematically stomped out. But we have a child in one or the other of these roles, or perhaps both at different times, who is constantly gaslit, constantly told who they are, told how they feel, told what they're thinking, told what reality is, and who cannot combat any of this or escape it in any way. A child who is essentially equipped only with the primitive infantile defenses they were born with, none of which are enough to defend against the relentless assault on reality and personhood that is the experience of living with a narcissist. Some people in these situations will be able to develop at least some self-concept and identity of their own in spite of the constant inundation, and they will be able to individuate. Those people might grow up to struggle with codependency. They might have self-esteem issues. They might struggle with anxiety or depression. They might struggle with enmeshment. They might have self-image issues in terms of struggling to realize who they are outside of the narcissistic parent's influence. They might deal with addiction, but they generally will not be narcissists. Some people will not be able to do that, though, and they may very well be narcissists as adults. These appear to be those people who were not able to evolve out of this infantile space. They never learn to see past themselves. They never develop an identity or a self-image. They never gain the ability to self-regulate. They never learn empathy. They develop no capacity to bond with other people. They seem to just be stuck in the same phase of development with the same primitive defense mechanisms and levels of functioning forever. The formation of identity does appear to be one of the keys here. Without this, the evolution just cannot move forward. Aging occurs, physical maturity occurs, gross and fine motor skills progress. People learn how to do things like speak more articulately, they learn to mimic, but the core evolution from child to adult does not seem to happen. And it does appear to be at least partly because without a stable developed identity, there's nowhere for this to really go. In order for someone to individuate from their caregiver, they have to be able to go into an identity of their own. If they're never allowed to have one, how are they going to do that? The evolution just stagnates and runs in a circle, and all of the things that they should have developed with maturity, empathy, internal locus of control, ability to delay gratification, responsibility, frustration tolerance, ability to address their own needs, broaden perspective, self-control, mentalization, to name a few, just don't happen. The mindsets, mechanisms, functions, and everything else don't just sit there in a stasis of time, though. They go through their own maladapted pseudo-evolutionary process of sorts, concretizing and becoming a self-perpetuating machine that uses itself to fuel itself in pursuit of survival. It can't integrate new information very well at all, tending to circulate the same few things over and over and over with very little deviation or change. The victim is always the victim. The hero is always the hero. And all information is viewed through that narrative lens in the service of perpetuating the one-dimensional idealized image of themselves they have tacked up on the wall of their minds in place of an actual identity. Virtually all of the behaviors and the mindsets we see from these personalities are natural outgrowths of the lack of these things. They are the natural result of the lack of evolution and growth here and the pseudo-evolution that takes place instead. These things are, in many respects, the natural state of such a primitive and arrested human being. The problem is, of course, that we are not primitive human beings anymore for the most part. We have learned to live together cooperatively, and the only way to do that effectively is by having empathy and consideration for other people. As we've discussed in previous episodes, when there are too many antisocial personalities like narcissists in society, it becomes unsafe and ineffective. Eventually, if antisocial personalities were to outnumber the pro-social ones, it would cease to function at all. This is one reason the legitimately increasing numbers of narcissistic personalities alarm people. Society can only support so many of them before there are serious problems. When someone believes they have no power, when they believe they are a target, when they believe they are the only thing that truly exists or matters, when they believe they can read the minds of other people and have special abilities that other people don't have, so therefore they don't need all the facts, when they believe they're under constant threat from literally everybody, these are people who automatically believe they are victims and are therefore entitled to do anything they want, either because the world owes them or because the world deserves it. Perhaps the saddest thing about so many narcissists is that they are victims, just not in the ways that they imagine. And this doesn't excuse their behavior in the way that they think it does. It doesn't excuse it at all, in fact. They are not children anymore. These are grown adults who have done the same wrong things for years. They know it's wrong and that they shouldn't do it. They don't care because they are the only thing that matters, and nothing carries more weight in their minds than that. They have no real empathy in situations where they stand to lose or gain something, and no ability to really care or even understand how things impact other people anyway. Now, some of the feedback to these kinds of episodes of the show is from people who say that saying narcissists are so limited and have serious psychological issues is letting them off the hook. And some of it is from people who say that holding narcissists accountable is being too hard on them because of these issues and limitations. The reality is that it's neither. It's just the truth. A tragic backstory does not excuse any villain's behavior. It helps us understand how they became that way, and that's it. This is no different. Everyone has a tragic backstory in some way or another, and the rest of us are not using that as a justification in our minds to go around hurting others so that we can feel important or because we think they deserve it. We are adults who got help with our issues, or we matured out of them, or we moved on, or whatever we did to deal with it. We didn't use it as an excuse to hurt other people, or to underperform, or to blame and punish other people for our own failings. We looked in the mirror and we saw both the cause and the solution to all of our own problems. We saw the person with the power in the mirror, ourselves. That's what being an adult is. It's knowing that, for example, no one's coming to save you, but also that you don't need anyone to come and save you because you can take care of yourself. It's knowing that you are the adult in the room, and that's okay, even if it sucks or if it's scary, because you can handle it. It's knowing that you have the power over your own life. This, of all things, narcissists can perhaps never really accept or understand. More's the pity. If you believe that childhood trauma or psychological issues excuse narcissist behavior, regardless of whether you think it lets them off the hook or if you think that it's unfair to blame them, know that it's you who thinks that. It has not been suggested here, nor will it be, because it's not true. We should not need to deny the very real, very serious psychological issues these personalities have in order to hold them accountable. Having psychological issues, even serious ones, does not automatically render someone not responsible for their actions. It does not automatically mean they don't know what they're doing or they couldn't help it. The reality is the majority of narcissists do not have the type of impairments that impact responsibility for their actions. It's never been a defense in court, for example, and it never will be, nor should it be. It's not that kind of psychological issue. What narcissists are is sad in many ways, and there are those who find it difficult not to act on their sympathy in these situations as well. Just remember that you do so at your own risk. This person will not recognize or appreciate the effort, nor will they feel compelled to respond in kind. They are not built that way. In point of fact, they are driven to take advantage of people who try to help them because they cannot understand this way of thinking and they do not believe in it. They really seem to feel that anyone who cares about other people, and especially anyone who cares about them, is a fool who gets what they deserve. The sooner we accept that, the safer we'll be. This person is not a child. They're not an animal that has been wounded and doesn't know any better. They're not a romanticized villain in a movie or a TV show. Narcissists are real adults in the real world who understand the difference between right or wrong and are really hurting real people anyway. That's the reality of the situation. Because of their many serious deficits, they don't care or really understand why some things are wrong, but that actually doesn't matter. They know, and knowing is all that's required to be held accountable for their actions.